The blood-red horizon swallowed the sun as Viola Hawkins staggered off the stagecoach, her boots hitting the dusty main street of Willow Creek with a soft thud that seemed to echo her uncertain future. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she was arriving in Montana territory with nothing but a single carpetbag, a letter from her deceased father's business partner, and a heart hardened by loss and betrayal. "Last stop, miss," the driver called down, tossing her small trunk beside her before climbing back to his perch. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Viola smoothed down her travel-worn blue dress and surveyed the town with wary eyes. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, saloon, general store, blacksmith, and the like stretched before her. Men in dusty clothes lounged outside the establishments, their curious gazes following her movements. "You must be Henry Hawkins' girl," a voice called. Viola turned to see a portly man with a graying mustache approaching. "Mr. Fredericks, the very same." He offered a curt nod but no handshake. "Your father owed me money when he died. Taking you in as my housekeeper is the only way I'll ever see any of it back." Viola swallowed hard. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, sir." Fredericks snorted. "Don't be. Your father was a fool who thought he could strike it rich in gold country. All he struck was an early grave. Come along, then." As they walked, Viola felt the stares of the townsfolk burning into her back. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but nothing could have prepared her for the desolation of the frontier or the coldness of her reception. "You'll cook, clean, and mind the store when I'm out," Fredericks explained as they approached his combined home and mercantile. "In return, you'll have a roof, meals, and $5 a month. I'm being more than fair, considering your father's debt." Viola nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite her rising apprehension. She had come west because she had nowhere else to go after her father's death, no family back in Philadelphia who would take her in. "One more thing," Fredericks added, pausing at the door. "Don't go getting any ideas about catching a husband here. No decent man wants damaged goods for a wife." Viola's face burned with humiliation. "I'm not. That limp of yours tells a different story," he interrupted, gesturing to her right leg. "Men out here need strong women who can work the land and bear healthy children. You'll never be a real wife to anyone. Best accept your place and be grateful for it." The words cut deep, reopening wounds that Viola had been trying to heal since the childhood illness that had left her with a permanent limp. She'd heard similar sentiments her entire life from her mother before she died, from potential suitors who had withdrawn their interest upon discovering her disability, from society ladies who whispered behind their fans. "I understand, Mr. Fredericks," she said quietly, though inside, a small flame of defiance flickered. She hadn't traveled 2,000 miles just to be reminded of her supposed shortcomings. Her new quarters turned out to be a tiny room off the kitchen, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a hook for her dress. Viola sat on the thin mattress after Fredericks left her to settle in, finally allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "I will make this work," she whispered to herself, unpacking her few possessions. "I have to." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Viola rose before the sun, determined to prove her worth. By the time Fredericks lumbered down for breakfast, she had a pot of coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. "You're up early," he remarked, surprise evident in his tone. "I believe in earning my keep," Viola replied, serving him a plate of eggs. The next few weeks fell into a grueling rhythm. Viola rose before dawn each day, prepared meals, swept floors, stocked shelves, and served customers. Her leg ached constantly, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. It was during her third week in Willow Creek that she first encountered Ethan Grayson. The bell above the mercantile door jangled, and Viola looked up from the inventory ledger to see a tall man ducking through the entrance. The late afternoon sun silhouetted him momentarily before he stepped fully into the shop, and Viola felt her breath catch. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular frame that spoke of hard work rather than idle living. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed a strong jawline. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, bright blue and startlingly direct as they met hers. "Afternoon," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "Frederick's around. He's gone to the bank," Viola replied, straightening her posture. "I can help you if you'd like." The stranger assessed her for a moment, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that made her cheeks warm. "You're new. I arrived a few weeks ago. I'm Viola Hawkins, Ethan Grayson." He removed his hat, revealing the full effect of those dark curls. "I own the Double G Ranch about 10 miles north of town." Viola nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after a long day of work. "What can I help you with, Mr. Grayson?" "I need supplies," he said, placing a list on the counter. "And please, just Ethan is fine." As Viola gathered the items on his list, she felt his gaze following her movements. She was accustomed to being watched. Her limp always drew attention, but something about Ethan's observation felt different. Less judgmental, more interested. "You're Henry Hawkins' daughter," he said suddenly as she counted out nails. Viola glanced up, surprised. "You knew my father, met him once or twice." Ethan leaned against the counter. "He spoke of you often, proud man when it came to his daughter." A lump formed in Viola's throat. "That's kind of you to say. It's the truth." He watched as she continued gathering his supplies. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said softly, touched by the simple sincerity in his voice. When she had collected everything, Ethan insisted on carrying the heavy sacks of flour and sugar himself. As he loaded them onto his wagon, Viola stood in the doorway, finding herself reluctant to end their interaction. "Will you be coming into town regularly, Mr. Grayson?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. He paused, securing a rope around his supplies. "I try to make it in every couple of weeks." His eyes found hers again, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Though I might find reason to come more often now." Before Viola could respond to this unexpected comment, Fredericks returned, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence before he came into view. "Grayson," he acknowledged gruffly, "I see you've met my new help." "I have," Ethan replied, his expression cooling slightly as he addressed the older man. "You're lucky to have her," Fredericks merely grunted in response. "She earns her keep." Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he turned back to Viola. "Good day, Miss Hawkins. I'll see you again soon." As he drove away, Viola couldn't help but watch until his wagon disappeared from view. There was something about Ethan Grayson that stirred emotions she'd long since buried: hope, curiosity, and something warmer that she dared not name. "Don't waste your time mooning after Grayson," Fredericks said sharply, breaking into her thoughts. "Men like him don't settle for women like you." Viola turned away, hiding the flash of hurt in her eyes. "I wasn't mooning, Mr. Fredericks. I was simply being polite to a customer." "See that it stays that way. Now get back to work. Those shelves won't stock themselves." Over the next few weeks, Viola found herself watching the door whenever the bell jangled, hoping to see Ethan's tall frame ducking through the entrance. True to his word, he returned to the mercantile more frequently than Fredericks seemed to expect, sometimes purchasing only small items that hardly warranted a trip to town. On his fourth visit in as many weeks, he caught Viola alone in the store again. "Miss Hawkins," he greeted, his voice warming the chilly autumn air he brought in with him. "How are you faring today?" "Well enough, Mr. Grayson," she replied, unable to suppress a small smile. "What brings you to town this time?" "Need some coffee," he said, then after a pause added, "and I was hoping to ask if you might consider joining me for Sunday dinner at the hotel restaurant." Viola's hands stilled on the bolt of fabric she'd been measuring. I'm not sure that would be appropriate, because of Fredericks." Ethan asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Partly," she admitted. "And partly because," she trailed off, uncertain how to express the doubts that plagued her. Because of what others might say, he suggested gently. Viola nodded, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't express. Mr. Grayson, Ethan, he corrected. Ethan, she conceded, the name feeling intimate on her lips. I appreciate your kindness, but I don't want your pity, his brow furrowed. Pity? Is that what you think this is, isn't it? She challenged, suddenly tired of pretending. I've seen how people look at me. I know what they think, what they say. Ethan stepped closer, his expression serious. I don't give a damn what anyone else thinks or says, and I certainly don't pity you, Viola Hawkins. I admire you. The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter traitorously. You don't know me well enough to admire me. I know enough, he countered. I know you traveled alone across the country after losing your father. I know you work from sunrise to sunset without complaint. I know you're kind to every customer who walks through that door, even the ones who don't deserve it. He paused, his voice softening, and I know I'd like to know you better if you'd allow it. Viola felt her resolve weakening in the face of his earnestness. Mr. Fredericks wouldn't approve. Let me worry about Fredericks. Ethan's smile returned, warming his features. Sunday at 1 o'clock, I'll come collect you. Before she could formulate another objection, the door opened again, admitting Mrs. Potter, the minister's wife. Ethan stepped back, tipping his hat to both women. Think about it, he said quietly to Viola, before turning to make a show of examining a shelf of tools. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Viola found herself unable to sleep. Ethan's invitation played over and over in her mind, along with Frederick's warning. No decent man wants damaged goods for a wife. You'll never be a real wife to anyone. The logical part of her knew that accepting Ethan's invitation would only lead to heartache. Even if his interest was genuine now, eventually he would realize what everyone else seemed to know, that she wasn't meant for marriage and family, that her limitations would become a burden. Yet another part of her, a part that had been silent for too long, whispered that perhaps she deserved a chance at happiness, however brief it might be. When Sunday arrived, Viola found herself putting extra care into her appearance. Wearing her one good dress, a modest navy blue with delicate embroidery at the collar, and arranging her chestnut hair in a style that softened her features. Fredericks eyed her suspiciously over his morning coffee. What's the occasion? I thought I might attend church service today, she replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. She did plan to go to church before meeting Ethan, HMPH. Fredericks returned to his newspaper. Don't be gone all day, I need those new shipments cataloged. I won't be long, Viola promised, ignoring the pang of guilt at her omission. The church service passed in a blur, with Viola hardly hearing Reverend Potter's sermon on forgiveness. Her mind was too preoccupied with thoughts of the dinner to come, alternating between anticipation and anxiety. As promised, Ethan was waiting outside the mercantile at 1 o'clock, his wagon freshly cleaned and his clothes more formal than she'd seen before, a crisp white shirt beneath a dark vest and jacket, his usual worn trousers replaced by clean black ones. You look beautiful, he said simply when she emerged, his eyes appreciative but respectful. Thank you, Viola replied, self-conscious under his gaze. You look quite handsome yourself. Ethan helped her into the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her despite the cool autumn air. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Willow Creek, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented luxury in this frontier town. Heads turned as they entered, and Viola could feel curious gazes following them to their table. Everyone is staring, she murmured as Ethan held her chair. Let them, he replied, taking his own seat across from her. They're just jealous I'm dining with the prettiest woman in the territory. Viola couldn't help but laugh at his outlandish compliment. You're quite the flatterer, Mr. Grayson. Not flattery if it's true. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And I thought we'd agreed on Ethan. As the meal progressed, Viola found herself relaxing in his company. Ethan was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences. He told her about his ranch, about his dreams of expanding his herd and building a larger house someday. "What about you?" he asked as they shared a slice of apple pie. "What are your dreams, Viola?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in a very long time. I suppose I haven't thought much about it," she admitted. "Lately, I've been focused on survival." Ethan's expression sobered, and before that, Viola hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I wanted what most women want, I imagine, a home of my own, perhaps children someday." She smiled sadly. "But life has a way of adjusting our expectations." "Because of your leg?" he asked directly. His frankness startled her. Most people pretended not to notice her disability, or worse, spoke about it in hushed, pitying tones. "Yes," she said finally. "I had rheumatic fever as a child. It left me with this limp. I've been told many times that no man would want a wife who might pass such weakness to his children." Ethan's expression darkened. "Whoever told you that was a damn fool, begging your pardon for the language. It's a common belief," Viola pointed out. "Common doesn't make it right." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "There's nothing wrong with you, Viola. Nothing that makes you less worthy of happiness than anyone else." The simple touch of his hand on hers and the conviction in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, unwilling to make a scene. "You hardly know me," she said again, though with less certainty than before. "I'm a good judge of character," Ethan replied, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "And I'd like the chance to get to know you better if you'll allow it." Against her better judgment, Viola found herself nodding. "I'd like that too." Their dinner ended too soon for Viola's liking, but she knew Fredericks would be suspicious if she stayed out much longer. As they drove back toward the mercantile, Ethan asked, "Will you walk with me next Sunday? There's a nice spot by the creek I'd like to show you." "I'd enjoy that," she replied, her heart lighter than it had been in years. When they reached the store, Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "I should be thanking you," Viola replied, reluctant to part from him. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a warmth that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead he gently squeezed her hand before releasing it. "Until next Sunday, then," he said, his voice husky. Viola nodded, unable to suppress her smile. Until Sunday. The week that followed seemed interminable. Fredericks was more demanding than usual, perhaps sensing the change in Viola's demeanor. The townsfolk, too, seemed to regard her differently, some with curiosity, others with outright disapproval. "I hear Grayson took you to dinner, Mrs." Potter commented when she came to purchase fabric, her tone carefully neutral. "That was kind of him." The implication was clear that Ethan's attention was charity rather than genuine interest. Viola straightened her shoulders. "Yes, it was a lovely afternoon," she replied simply, refusing to be baited. By the time Sunday arrived again, the entire town was buzzing with speculation about Ethan Grayson's interest in the crippled Eastern girl, as she'd overheard herself described. Viola almost convinced herself to cancel their outing, to spare them both the gossip, but when Ethan arrived, his smile so genuine and his eyes so warm, her resolve crumbled. Their walk to the creek was peaceful, the autumn forest ablaze with color. Ethan matched his stride to hers without comment, occasionally offering his arm when the path grew uneven. "It's beautiful here," Viola said as they reached a small clearing beside the burbling creek. "So different from Philadelphia. Do you miss it?" Ethan asked, spreading his jacket on a flat boulder for her to sit. Viola considered the question as she settled onto the makeshift seat. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the theaters, but there's a freedom here that I never felt back east." She smiled up at him. "And the company is certainly preferable." Ethan laughed, the sound rich and warm. "That's good to hear." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I've been thinking about you all week." "Have you?" Viola asked, her heart quickening. He nodded, his gaze on the flowing water, thinking that I've never met anyone quite like you before. I'm not sure that's a compliment, she teased, trying to lighten the moment. Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly serious. It is, you're strong, Viola. Stronger than most men I know. And kind, despite having every reason not to be, and beautiful, he paused, reaching to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. So beautiful it takes my breath away sometimes. Viola felt herself blushing deeply. You shouldn't say such things. Why not? They're true, because, she hesitated, her insecurities rising to the surface, because it makes me hope for things that can't be. What things? He pressed gently, his hand finding hers. A future, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The kind of future I've been told isn't possible for someone like me. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. Who decides what's possible for you, Viola? Some doctor back east, Fredericks, the gossips in town. He shook his head firmly. No one gets to decide your future but you. It's not that simple, she protested. It can be, he countered, then before she could argue further, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Viola froze momentarily in surprise before responding, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart beating rapidly beneath her palm, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you, he confessed. You have? Viola asked, incredulous. From the moment you looked up at me in that store, I was a goner. He smiled, his thumb caressing her cheek. I don't care what anyone says, Viola. I know what I want, and it's you. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Viola's life. Despite Frederick's disapproval and the town's persistent gossip, Ethan courted her openly and with determination. He visited the mercantile regularly, brought her wildflowers and books from his own small collection, and took her on Sunday outings that became the highlight of her week. As winter settled over Willow Creek, their relationship deepened. Ethan shared stories of his childhood in Missouri, of coming west with his father after the war, and building the ranch from nothing after his parents died in a flash flood 5 years earlier. Viola told him about her own losses, her mother's death when she was 12, the illness that had changed her life, her father's desperate gamble on a western gold mine that had ultimately cost him his life. I was supposed to join him once he was established, she explained one snowy afternoon as they sat by the stove in the mercantile's back room, taking advantage of Frederick's absence. Instead, I received a letter saying he died of pneumonia, along with his instructions to contact his partner. Fredericks, Ethan supplied, his distaste evident. Yes, Viola sighed. Father apparently owed him money. Taking me in as his housekeeper was Frederick's idea of collecting the debt. That's not right, Ethan said, his jaw tightening. Your father's debts weren't yours to pay, Viola shrugged. I had nowhere else to go, no other family, very little money. Fredericks offered a roof and meals, at least. You deserve so much more than that, Ethan said, taking her hand. You deserve everything, Viola. As Christmas approached, the mercantile grew busier with townsfolk purchasing gifts and special supplies for the holiday. Viola worked longer hours, often collapsing into bed exhausted at the end of each day. Ethan's visits became briefer but no less meaningful, often just a few stolen moments while Fredericks was occupied elsewhere. On Christmas Eve, a heavy snowstorm blanketed the town. Business was slow, with most people staying home by their fires. Fredericks retired early, complaining of rheumatism aggravated by the cold, leaving Viola to close the store. Just as she was preparing to lock up, the door opened, admitting a flurry of snow and Ethan, his hat and shoulders white with accumulation. "Ethan," Viola exclaimed. "What are you doing out in this weather?" "I couldn't let Christmas Eve pass without seeing you," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "And I wanted to give you this." From inside his coat, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "You didn't have to bring me a gift," Viola protested, though she was deeply touched by the gesture. I wanted to. Ethan smiled, removing his gloves. Go on, open it. With careful fingers, Viola untied the ribbon and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a delicate silver locket. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "It's beautiful." "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice soft with memory. "My father gave it to her on their wedding day. I've been saving it for—" He paused, then continued more deliberately, "for someone special." Viola's hands trembled slightly as she held the precious heirloom. "I can't accept this. It should go to your wife someday." Ethan took her hands in his, locket and all. "That's what I'm trying to tell you, Viola. I want you to be my wife." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as his words registered. "What? I'm asking you to marry me," Ethan said, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in the store. And I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Viola's eyes, a mixture of joy and fear. "Ethan, you know what people say, that I can't, that I won't be able to. Be a real wife," he finished for her, his expression hardening briefly before softening again. "That's nonsense, Viola. You'll be the most real wife any man could ask for, strong, kind, intelligent, and brave." He squeezed her hands gently. "As for children, if they come, they come. If not, we'll have each other. That's enough for me." A tear slipped down Viola's cheek. "Are you sure?" "Truly sure. I couldn't bear it if you changed your mind later, if you came to resent me." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Ethan said firmly. "I love you, Viola Hawkins. Every part of you, exactly as you are." With those words, the last of Viola's resistance crumbled. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan's face broke into a radiant smile before he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down again, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. "When?" he asked when they finally parted. "How soon can you be ready?" Viola laughed at his eagerness. "I need to give Mr. Fredericks notice, and we should publish the banns, hang the banns," Ethan interrupted. "And hang Fredericks too. He's worked you like a slave for months." "You don't owe him anything." "Even so," Viola insisted, "I want to do this properly. Give me a month to settle things here and prepare." Ethan groaned dramatically but conceded. 1 month then, and not a day more. True to his word, on January 25, 1876, Ethan Grayson stood waiting at the altar of Willow Creek's small church. Despite the winter chill, nearly the entire town had turned out for the event, some out of genuine goodwill, but many simply to witness the culmination of what had been the most talked-about courtship in recent memory. Viola wore a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Potter had helped her alter from one of her mother's old gowns, shipped from Philadelphia at considerable expense. Around her neck hung Ethan's mother's locket, and in her hands she carried a small bouquet of hothouse flowers that Ethan had ordered specially from Helena. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of Reverend Potter, who had graciously offered to give her away, Viola's steps were steady despite her limp. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan, whose expression of absolute adoration gave her the courage to ignore the whispers and stares. When the Reverend asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Viola half expected someone to object, to voice aloud all the reasons she had been told she could never be a proper wife. But the moment passed in silence, and before she knew it, she was standing beside Ethan, their hands joined as they spoke their vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Potter declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." As Ethan's lips met hers, sealing their union, Viola felt a lifetime of doubt and insecurity begin to dissolve. For the first time, she truly believed that she might have a future filled with love and acceptance rather than limitation and loneliness. The small reception that followed was held at the hotel, where Ethan had reserved the dining room. Many townspeople offered congratulations, though some clearly still harbored doubts about the match. Fredericks did not attend, having made his disapproval abundantly clear when Viola had given her notice. "Mrs. Grayson," Ethan murmured in her ear as they shared their first dance, his arm strong around her waist, supporting her subtly when her leg began to tire. "How does it sound?" "Wonderful," Viola replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I never thought I'd have this." "You deserve this and more," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Later that night, as Ethan's wagon carried them through the moonlit snow toward the Double G Ranch toward home, Viola found herself overcome with emotion. "What is it, love?" Ethan asked, noticing her tears. "I'm just happy," she assured him, wiping her cheeks. "And grateful." "You've given me so much, Ethan." He shook his head, reaching over to take her hand. "You've given me far more, Viola, a purpose beyond just working the land, a reason to build something lasting." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "A future worth fighting for." As the ranch house came into view, its windows glowing with welcoming light from the fires Ethan's foreman had kept burning in their absence, Viola felt a profound sense of homecoming. This place, this man, this life, it was more than she had ever dared to dream possible. Ethan drew the wagon to a halt before the house and turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you, something I've felt since that very first day." "What is it?" Viola asked, curious at his intensity. He took her gloved hands in his voice low and fervent. "You've been mine since the day we met, Viola Hawkins Grayson. From the moment our eyes first met across that dusty store, I knew you were the one I'd been waiting for all my life." Viola's breath caught at the naked emotion in his face. "And you've been mine," she whispered back. "Even when I was too afraid to admit it, even when I thought I didn't deserve this kind of happiness." "You deserve every happiness," Ethan said firmly, "and I intend to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never doubt it again." With that promise hanging in the crisp winter air, he lifted her from the wagon and carried her across the threshold of their home, not as a gesture meant to compensate for her disability, but as a husband welcoming his beloved wife to the life they would build together. Spring came early to Montana that year. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared on the prairie, Viola found herself settling comfortably into her role as mistress of the Double G Ranch. The transition hadn't been without challenges, learning to manage a household larger than Frederick's small quarters, becoming acquainted with the rhythms of ranch life, and occasionally dealing with the lingering skepticism of neighbors who still wondered how long Ethan's charity would last. But for every difficult moment, there were a dozen joyful ones. Mornings waking in Ethan's arms, afternoons working side by side to improve their home, evenings spent reading aloud by the fire or simply talking about their days. Viola discovered in herself a strength and capability she hadn't known she possessed, while Ethan proved daily that his love was neither pity nor temporary infatuation, but a deep and abiding commitment. By summer, Viola had transformed the ranch house with small touches that made it truly their home: curtains at the windows, a vegetable garden behind the kitchen, wildflowers in jars on the table. She had also begun accompanying Ethan more frequently on his rides around the property, growing confident on the gentle mare he had selected especially for her. It was during one such ride in late July that they paused on a hilltop overlooking the valley where their cattle grazed. The day was gloriously warm, the sky an endless blue, and wildflowers painted the hillside in splashes of yellow and purple. "I've been thinking," Ethan said as they sat side by side on a blanket, sharing a simple picnic lunch. "This would be a fine spot for a new house someday." Viola looked around, appreciating the view and the gentle slope that would make access easier for her on days when her leg troubled her more than usual. "It's beautiful, but I love our home." "As do I," Ethan agreed, "but I've been thinking we might need more room eventually." Something in his tone made Viola turn to study his face. "More room," Ethan's smile was both tender and excited, "for a family, if you're willing." Viola's heart skipped a beat. Ethan, you know what the doctor in Philadelphia said. I know what some Eastern doctor who's never delivered a baby on the frontier told a child about her prospects. Ethan interrupted gently. But I also know that Dr. Clark in town says there's no reason you couldn't safely carry a child. Viola stared at him in shock. You spoke to Dr. Clark about this. When, last month when I went in for supplies, Ethan admitted, looking slightly abashed. I didn't want to raise your hopes unnecessarily, but I wanted to know if what you'd been told was true. He took her hand. It's not, Viola. Your hip might make labor more challenging, but it doesn't make motherhood impossible. Tears filled Viola's eyes, tears of hope and possibility that she had never allowed herself to feel. Do you really think we could have a child? I think we can try, Ethan said softly. If it's what you want, it is, she whispered. Oh, Ethan, it is. As autumn approached, Viola's suspicions were confirmed by Dr. Clark himself. She was with child, due in the early spring. The news was met with joy from Ethan and cautious congratulations from their neighbors, many of whom still harbored doubts about her ability to carry to term. Don't you listen to a word of their nonsense, Ethan told her firmly one evening when she'd returned from town upset by the whispered concerns she'd overheard at the general store. You're stronger than any of them know. But what if they're right? Viola asked, her hand resting protectively over the small swell of her abdomen. What if I can't do this? Ethan knelt before her chair, his hands covering hers. You can, we can, together. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I have faith in you, Viola, more than you know. The winter of 1876-1877 was harsh, with blizzards that sometimes isolated the ranch for days at a time. As Viola's pregnancy progressed, Ethan became increasingly protective, hiring additional hands to manage the cattle so he could remain closer to home. He built a cradle with his own hands, working on it in the evenings by the fire while Viola sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket for the baby. What shall we name him? Ethan asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the prominent curve of her belly where their child kicked vigorously. Him, Viola laughed. So certain it's a son, just a feeling, Ethan replied with a grin. A strong Grayson boy to help his papa with the ranch someday. And if it's a girl, Viola challenged. Then she'll be as beautiful and brave as her mother, Ethan said without hesitation. And I'll be wrapped around her little finger from the moment she arrives. On March 12, 1877, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours, Viola gave birth to a daughter. Despite Dr. Clark's concerns and the whispered predictions of difficulty, both mother and child emerged from the ordeal healthy and strong. She's perfect, Ethan whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. Just like her mother. They named her Hope Elizabeth Grayson Hope for the emotion that had sustained them through the pregnancy, and Elizabeth after Ethan's mother. As spring blossomed around them, Viola recovered her strength, amazed at how naturally she adapted to motherhood despite all the fears that had been instilled in her. Little Hope thrived, growing plump and cheerful, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Visitors came more frequently now, some genuinely delighted by the family's happiness, others clearly surprised that Viola had not only survived childbirth, but was flourishing as a mother. Mrs. Potter, who had become a true friend during the pregnancy, brought a handmade christening gown for Hope's baptism. You've proved them all wrong, my dear, she said as she watched Viola nurse the baby, though I never doubted you would. Even Fredericks made an appearance one day, his curiosity apparently overcoming his disapproval. He stood awkwardly in their parlor, hat in hand, eyeing the thriving infant with evident surprise. She seems healthy, he offered stiffly. She is, Viola confirmed, unable to suppress a small smile of vindication. Would you like to hold her? Fredericks declined hastily, but his visit marked a turning point in the town's attitude toward the Graysons. If even the mercantile owner who had so vocally predicted Viola's failure as a wife and mother could acknowledge their success, perhaps there was something to it after all. By Hope's first birthday, the Grayson family had become an established and respected part of the Willow Creek community. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management, expanding its herds and acreage. Viola, once pitied as the crippled Eastern girl, was now sought out for her advice on household matters and her skill with medicinal herbs, which she had studied extensively during her pregnancy. On a warm evening in early summer, as they sat on the porch watching Hope toddle unsteadily across the yard, Ethan reached for Viola's hand. "Happy?" he asked, though the answer was evident in her contented expression. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, that I have you and Hope in this home." "Believe it," Ethan said firmly. "You've earned every bit of this happiness, Viola, not despite who you are, but because of it." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Viola reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the frightened, uncertain young woman who had stepped off the stage coach in Willow Creek to the confident wife and mother she had become, it was a transformation she could never have predicted. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her pensive expression. Viola smiled, watching as Hope abandoned her wobbly walking attempts and crawled rapidly toward a butterfly that had caught her attention. "I was thinking about what you said to me that Christmas Eve when you proposed, about how I'd been yours since the day we met." "It was true," Ethan affirmed. "I knew it the moment I saw you." "I think I knew it too," Viola admitted. "I was just too afraid to believe it could be real, that someone could love me wholly without reservation or condition." "And now," Ethan prompted, his blue eyes warm in the fading light. "Now I believe," Viola said simply. "Now I know what it means to be truly loved, to be a real wife, a real mother, a real person not defined by limitations but by possibilities." Ethan leaned over to kiss her, a gesture as natural and necessary as breathing after nearly 2 years of marriage. "You were never anything less than real, Viola Grayson. Anyone who couldn't see that was blind to what matters most." Hope chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal as she finally captured the butterfly between her chubby hands, only to release it again in surprise when it fluttered its wings against her palms. The child's laughter rang out across the yard, pure and joyful. "She's going to be a handful," Ethan chuckled, watching as their daughter immediately began pursuing the escaped insect again. "Like her father," Viola teased. "Oh no, that determination is all you," Ethan countered with a grin, speaking of which, his expression grew more serious. "Dr. Clark mentioned something interesting when I saw him in town yesterday." Viola raised an eyebrow. "Oh," he said, "there's no reason we couldn't consider giving Hope a brother or sister someday, if you wanted to, of course." Warmth bloomed in Viola's chest at the thought. "I think I'd like that very much." "Yeah," Ethan's face lit up with hope. "Yeah," Viola confirmed, leaning into his side as they watched their daughter play in the last golden light of day. "Our family has room to grow, just like our love." As darkness settled over the ranch and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, Ethan and Viola gathered their sleepy daughter and carried her inside to the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the life they had created through love, trust, and the courage to believe in possibilities rather than limitations. In the quiet of the evening, as Hope slept peacefully in her room and Viola prepared for bed, Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. "You know what?" he murmured against her skin. "What?" Viola asked, leaning back into his embrace. "You've been mine since the day we met," he said, repeating the words that had become a cherished refrain between them. "And I thank God for it every single day." Viola turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him properly. "And you've been mine," she whispered against his lips. "The man who saw me truly saw me when everyone else looked away." The man who helped me believe I could be more than what others said I was. You did that yourself, Ethan corrected gently. I just had the good sense to recognize the extraordinary woman you've always been. As they held each other in the soft lamplight, Viola reflected that this was the true miracle of their love, not that Ethan had saved her from a life of limitation, but that together, they had created a life without limits, a love without conditions, and a future filled with endless possibility. And in the years that followed through the birth of 2 more children, through droughts and blizzards, through prosperity and hardship, that love remained their foundation. As steady and true as the day Ethan Grayson had first walked into Frederick's Mercantile and met the woman who would transform his life as completely as he had transformed hers. For Viola Hawkins, Grayson, once told she could never be a real wife, had become not only that but so much more: a beloved partner, a nurturing mother, a valued member of her community, and most importantly, a woman who had finally learned to define herself not by others' limitations, but by her own boundless capacity for love and resilience. The end.